there, I'm Dr. B, and welcome to the module on disruptive behavior. Some people like to take notes as we go through, so if that's you, I encourage you to press pause and go print out the handouts that go along with this presentation. This module is going to flow just like the other ones do. First, I'm going to talk about the problem that we're seeing, then I'll talk about the reasons for the problem, and then finally we'll go over what to do about it. So with that being said, let's get started. Okay, so first let's review a little bit of information about disruptive behavior. I'm not going to drown you in research statistics, but I am going to give you a good context of the problem before we move on to the reasons it's a problem and then what to do about it. So disruptive behavior can be considered behaviors that occur when a child is having a difficult time controlling their actions. So these could be like temper tantrums, or a child who's constantly interrupting others, impulsive behaviors, aggressive behaviors, or really any kind of like socially inappropriate behavior that the child continues to demonstrate. So when we think about disruptive behavior and as it relates to interactive screen time, what we're really seeing here is a state of hyperarousal of the nervous system and mood dysregulation. So when a child is on interactive screen time a lot, we could see their nervous systems getting agitated and them then demonstrating these disruptive behaviors. So electronic screen syndrome is a syndrome that was coined by Dr. Victoria Dunkley, who's an integrative psychiatrist. And what it is the syndrome is characterized by disruptive symptoms in the areas of mood, cognition, anxiety, behavior, and social interactions. And it's caused by an overly aroused nervous system. Okay. So because the core components of this syndrome are, again, hyperarousal of the nervous system and mood dysregulation, kids who present with this often have difficulty with their relationships with their peers and with their family, and maybe have some stalled social development, and also demonstrate a diminished capacity for empathy and intimacy. So research suggests that there's a link between media consumption and disruptive behaviors. Now, when we think of disruptive behaviors, we want to recognize that even in like the most severe form of disruptive behavior that we would see, which would be like a diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder, like even at its extreme presentation, it almost always comes along with something else. So a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder almost always presents with another diagnosis like ADHD or PTSD if there's a history of trauma. And so the same thing when we're looking at disruptive behaviors, we're looking on a smaller scale, but we want to recognize that there might be something else going on. And so opposition and defiance are strategies that kids will often use to try to exert some control over their environment if they're feeling stressed or inept in some way. So again, these behaviors are often secondary to something else, whether it be like attention issues or learning difficulty, or the child's, being in a state of like their nervous system being activated or just overly stimulated. So disruptive behavior can be a sign that the frontal lobe isn't working properly. The frontal lobe is our control panel for our personalities and our communication abilities. It houses our ability to pay attention, our working memory, and our goal management skills. And it plays a vital role in our ability to express our emotions, to problem solve, to our language skills, and to demonstrate judgment. So studies suggest that excessive screen time, including smartphone use, in teens and preteens is associated with behaviors consistent with poor impulse control. So again, we're looking at poor impulse control is a sign of the frontal lobe not working properly. So kids with electronic screen syndrome tend to have a low tolerance for frustration, and that results in meltdowns. So again, we're seeing that the frontal lobe isn't working properly, and they're likely in a heightened state of stress. So because social skills and mood regulation are dependent on good frontal lobe functioning, children with electronic screen syndrome often act much younger than their years. So when there is a decreased ability to tolerate disappointment, we often see more disruptive behaviors. When the child's having a difficult time coping with that difficult emotion of being disappointed, they may act out. Interactive screen time can create this false experience of ease and success. It offers a lot of immediate gratification and can make children less able to tolerate things like boredom or disappointment. And it could even cause them to appear, entitled, as if they don't want to work either at school or, at a job or even in a relationship. So now that we have a little bit more context around the problem, let's explore the reasons for this problem. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the reasons it's a problem section. I'm going to review the following 2 reasons for disruptive behavior as it relates to interactive screen time. The first being electronic screen syndrome and really how it's a disorder of dysregulation, and the second being how screens affect our brains. So again, electronic screen syndrome is a disorder of dysregulation. So because interactive screen time is so stimulating, it can shift our bodies into a state of fight, flight, or freeze. And, this leads to a whole slew of changes in our systems due to stress and our nervous system going into a heightened state of arousal. And sometimes this stress response can be immediate, but other times it can actually build up in a cumulative way over time. So you can view electronics not unlike a stimulant, like say caffeine or even amphetamines. It puts the body into a state of high arousal and hyperfocus, which is then followed by a crash. Our brains are evolutionarily designed to respond to stimulating visual input. So things that are really bright, that have a lot of color, that have a lot of contrast and movement. This is called our orienting response. And, our orienting response serves to help us survive. It helps us to assess threat and danger. The problem is that when this visual input that's so stimulating, when it is artificially created, our brains don't know the difference. So our brains don't know the difference of us truly being in danger or us playing a video game and, our player in the video game being in danger. Either way, it can set off, it can hijack this orienting response and put us in a state of stress. And over time, if this happens repeatedly, our kids can start to remain in this heightened state of alert or heightened state of stress. And when we're under stress, the blood flow in our brain changes. So the blood flows away from our higher areas of thinking, our cortex, and it flows more towards the primitive areas or our limbic area. And when this happens, over time, it can have some effects on the brain and how the types of behavior that we're seeing in our kids. So for instance, what this would look like if your child's in a heightened state of stress and it's happening repeatedly and they're kind of staying in this heightened state, blood is flowing away from their frontal lobe and those higher areas of thinking in their cortex, and it's flowing more towards their primitive areas. And what this looks like is, impulsive behaviors and, disruptive behaviors, not thinking through their actions, difficulty in social situations, and even like a delay in maturation, again, if the blood flow is continuing to be shunted more towards the primitive area of the brain. So just a quick recap, we reviewed the following 2 reasons for disruptive behavior as it relates to interactive screen time. One is how it's, electronic screen syndrome and that state of dysregulation, and 2 being how screens affect our brains in terms of the blood flow and where blood gets shunted to if we're in a chronic heightened level of stress. I'm going to review the following 2 steps to decreasing disruptive behavior as it's related to interactive screen time. One is the Reset program by Dr. Victoria Dunkley, and 2 is how to reintroduce limited screen time and monitor your child after the Reset program. So the Reset program by Dr. Victoria Dunkley is a straightforward 21-day electronic fast. The reason for this elimination approach is to reset your child's brain and give it a break from the hyperarousal related to interactive screen time, and to allow their brain to reset and get blood flowing back into the cortex and into the frontal lobe. So, I found this book, the Reset Your Child's Brain book, really helpful in terms of conceptualizing what happens to the brain when your child is on interactive screen time too much. And I've actually recommended this book to clients, and I've gotten good feedback. I've had clients come in and say, I see it. I see when their frontal lobe is shutting down. I see how, these screens are impacting them. And so it's good when the parents are able to observe and make the connection of what's happening in their child's brain and then how it's affecting their behavior. So for the Reset program, you want to consider all electronics, not just, video games, but smartphones, tablets, e-readers, so on. You want to consider all electronics during this time. Before you start the Reset program, the first thing you want to do is you want to prepare your child. You're going to start with the why, the reason that you're going to have them take part in this Reset program. You're going to explain to them how screens are too engaging and too stimulating to their brains, and the way that the screen grabs their attention, it's affecting their stress level and how their bodies are responding by firing off all these stress signals. Because even though they may not feel excited, the interactive screen has a way of hijacking their orienting response and putting them into a state of stress because of this artificial stimulation that they're getting from the screens. You want to explain that when this happens, when your body gets sent into this stress response, it causes blood to move from the frontal lobe and the cortex and be shunted to the more primitive areas of the brain. And when this happens repeatedly over time, your child can stay in this heightened state of stress, and, blood just continues to be shunted away from the frontal lobe. And over time, it doesn't do anything good for them, right? It affects their ability to focus, problem solve, think through their behaviors. And oftentimes it's these disruptive behaviors that are really getting them into trouble. So you want to, empathize with them and explain to them, I think part of the problem of this disruptive behavior that we're seeing is how much you're on the video game or how much you're on your device. When I see you act out in these ways, I know that something else is going on, and we need to do this to get a handle on these behaviors. You're going to explain that, you're in this together and that they realize it's not going to be easy. If you're met with defiance, When you tell your child about taking part in the reset program, you're going to explain to them that even this defiance that you're being met with is a symptom of, them being in this state of hyperarousal and their mood dysregulation, and how it's even more reason that you need to do the reset program to give their brain a chance to rest and reset and get their blood flowing back into their frontal lobe so that they have an easier time coping with things that are disappointing to them. So, it may not be an easy conversation, and that I understand. I've had these conversations with my clients. I mean, oftentimes when, my clients come in and the parents are telling me what's going on, and I'll explain to them this program, I'll explain this is what I think needs to happen, and the kids get very upset, but you have to stand firm in the reasons why you're doing this. You care too much about your child to let them go on in this state of exhibiting disruptive behavior, getting themselves in trouble. You need to give their brain a rest and a reset so that, they can be the best that they can be. So before you start the reset program, you first want to plan activities to replace the screen time. So again, with the average elementary age student spending 4 to 6 hours a day on interactive screen time, that's a lot of time to fill. So you don't want to start the reset program without anything to replace that time, because it's going to make it so much harder. So before you take any devices away, you want to sit down with your child and you're going to brainstorm activities that they can take part in during the times when they would normally be on their interactive screen time. So you're going to sit down with them, you're going to brainstorm activities, you're going to take into account things that they're interested in, you're going to gather those activities and have them ready before you even start the program. You want to consider television during the reset program. So Dr. Victoria Dunkley does not recommend having your child be able to watch television during the reset program. However, in her book, she does talk about the difference between passive screen time and interactive screen time, and how passive screen time does not seem to have the same effects on the brain that interactive screen time has. So when I'm working with clients, I leave it to the discretion of the parents, but if the parents do decide to allow their child to watch television during the reset, I recommend to have it limited. If the child's, on their interactive screen time 4 to 6 hours a day, you don't want that then replaced with 4 to 6 hours of television. You want to limit the television if you're going to allow it. So I usually recommend like a half hour to an hour a day. And, I tell parents, and use this time like strategically, if you need to make dinner or you need to make an important phone call, use the time when your child's watching a television show to do those things. Pay attention to how much they're watching TV and make sure that whatever they're watching is not too exciting and stimulating, because you don't want it, activating the orienting response and your child being sent into a stress response. So if they're going to watch television, make it be something neutral, nothing that's going to send them into the state of hyperarousal. So next thing you would do is you would set a date and collect all the devices. So you're going to set a date for the electronic fast, like when it's going to start. You're going to talk to your child about it. You're going to put it on the calendar. They're going to know ahead of time when this is happening. You're going to have your child then, collect all of their devices and bring them to you, but then you do want to go and do a check and make sure that they didn't conveniently miss something. There have been cases where, the parent thinks that they're taking part in the reset, but then the behaviors are persisting, and they come to find that their child kept an iPod that they were playing games on, at night. So, and then once they're able to get that device, away from the child, then the behaviors start to decrease. So again, make sure your child brings you the devices, but you do a double check. You might want to consider locking up the devices, or maybe even putting them in your car or taking them to work with you. It might sound extreme, but your child's going to try to get a hold of their interactive devices any way that they can. So if they're available or they're nearby, they will grab them and they will start playing on them. I've seen this with clients myself where, the family is trying to take part in this reset program. Child comes home from school, mom and dad aren't home from work yet. He finds the device and he's playing on it. So you want to make sure that you have the devices in a place where your child can't get to them. So then you're going to start the reset program. You're going to start this 3-week electronic fast. And again, 3 weeks is a typical time when you hear for like behavior change or any kind of like habit change. So you want to give your child 3 weeks so that their brain can reset. They can get out of that state of hyperarousal and mood dysregulation, and they can start making new neural pathways. 3 weeks is the amount of time that your child's brain will need to really reset and get to a more baseline level from that hyperaroused state that they were in. So during the reset, you do want to consider, if your child is on a computer at school. Sometimes kids can be on a computer for 2 hours or more at school during the day. So if the behaviors are, even if you took all of the electronic devices away at home, but you still see these behaviors, you want to consider if, their computer time at school is having an impact on them, and if you feel like it is, you might want to consider talking to the school. Again, in Dr. Victoria Dunkley's book, she talks a lot about how to approach the school to talk about what you're learning and to get certain accommodations during the reset program. So again, you just want to consider, like, if your child is on a computer at school, if that is impacting their behavior, but if you're seeing a decrease in the behavior, it really might not be necessary to have them eliminate computer at school. It might be enough just that you're eliminating the electronics at home, because again, at school, they're most likely not on really exciting video games or things that might send them into that state. But again, if the behavior persists and you have a feeling, like your gut feeling is like, I think it might be something that's going on at school, you consider that. You also want to consider, sometimes kids are required to do their homework on a computer. And if that's the case and you're uncomfortable with that, like you want them to not be doing their homework on a computer, you can talk to your child's teacher about non-electronic solutions for their homework. If maybe they could do their assignments on paper for the next 3 weeks, or, if homework on a computer is unavoidable, then you might want to have your child do their homework earlier in the evening. Maybe like set a deadline to have their homework done 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, to give their nervous system like ample time to, relax and wind down before sleep. You might want to consider following homework with activities intended for relaxation, like, breathing exercises, listening to music, like soft music, taking a bath or a shower, or maybe doing like legs up the wall pose, like a yoga pose where you have your child put their legs up the wall and then maybe one hand on their chest, one hand on their belly, and just breathe. Again, trying to decrease the arousal that from the electronic screen so that you're bringing them into a more relaxed, calm state. So after the reset program is done, after this 3-week period of no electronic and interactive screen time at all, then you're going to start reintroducing screen time. So you're going to pick an amount of time per day. You're not just going to give your child back their devices and let them go back to, the amount of time that they were on their devices before, not have any limits around it. Like once you reintroduce the electronics, you want to set limits around it. So you're going to pick a time, like it might be 30 minutes a day to start, or maybe 30 days during the week, 30 minutes during the week. and then maybe an hour on the weekends. But during this time, you're going to be monitoring your child for any like pre-reset behaviors, like any of these disruptive behaviors coming back. You're going to be monitoring your child and paying attention to how they behave after they get off of the interactive screen time. So if the disruptive behaviors start again, or you're seeing those same behaviors that you were seeing before the reset program, Dr. Victoria Dunkley does recommend doing a whole nother reset. However, when I work with clients, if the parent is not really up to another reset, we'll talk about really reining in that interactive screen time. So maybe it moves to, no interactive screen time during the week, and then maybe 15 minutes or a half hour on the weekends, or maybe it's just like 15 minutes during the week and then a half hour on the weekends. Again, as a parent, you use your judgment. You observe your child, you observe their behavior, and you make the call in terms of what you think their brain can handle, because it really is going to be individual for every child in terms of how much interactive screen time they can manage. You also want to consider, if your child has kind of always demonstrated disruptive behavior, they've been the type of kid who seemed like they were kind of run by a motor, always on the go, strong-willed. If this has been your child since like age 2, 3, even before they had interactive screen time, you want to consider that, because that would be kind of like what their baseline is. So if your child has always had some disruptive behaviors, but then you saw a big uptick in these behaviors once they were on interactive screen time, with the reset, and as you see these behaviors decrease, you want to consider what that baseline was and if they're getting back to that baseline. So just a quick recap, I reviewed the following 2 steps for decreasing disruptive behavior as it relates to interactive screen time. 1 is the reset program by Dr. Victoria Dunkley, and 2 is how to reintroduce limited screen time and monitor your child after the reset program. So that is the module on disruptive behavior. I congratulate you on your commitment to learning this information. Until next time, I'm Dr. B, signing off.